I'm really pleased to be joined by Labour's Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. John, very nice to see you on the day that you announce a 20-point plan to boost the power, the earning ability of workers. A good chunk of it represents probably the biggest shift back to trade unions of power. I was trying to work out probably since the immediate post-war period. Now, convention would say that the British people don't vote for measures that strengthen trade unions. You're taking quite a big risk here, aren't you?
It's more about giving people security. Take a few examples from the programme itself. We're going to end zero-hours contracts. We're going to introduce what they call the New Zealand model, where you can be assured of the hours that you're going to work. And the reason for that is I just give examples from my own constituency of families that don't know what hours they're going to work that week, what income they'll have, can't tell their kids whether or not they can afford, well, that new coat next week or whether they can go on holiday this year. We're trying to give them security. And, you know, it's not asking the earth. And interesting enough, you know, on this particular issue, companies like McDonnell's now are beginning to move. I campaigned on this. I
want to come back to you about this whole issue of zero-hours contracts and workers' rights. But, for example, you are saying, for example, that you want trade unions to have the power to negotiate sectoral wage deals, right? Now, that would be a revolution in the way that pay is set in this country.
What's happened in this country over the last 20-odd years is collective bargaining has declined.
Yep.
80% of our workforce used to be covered by collective bargaining. It's down to about 20% now, and that's eroded wages overall. And we can't live in a society. It goes completely contrary to British values, where we saw this morning the reports of British nurses having a pay cut now of 12% over the last, well, 7 or 8 years. British nurses, RCN are now saying our nurses are having to go to food banks because they can't feed themselves on the wages that they get. That runs contrary to everything we believe in as a society. So it's looking at those issues to make sure people have secure employment, but also when they go to work, they have a level of income that enables them, well, actually to put food on their plates. You know?
But just to sort of talk to you about how this would work in practice. So let's take the car industry. You're basically saying that trade unions in the car industry would be able to negotiate as a group with all car employers about what the pay rise should be across the whole industry.
We want to try and get back to basic pay rates overall, because in that way you can actually get to a situation where people are properly paid, they can know what their payments will be, because in many instances now what we're finding is wages are so low. Not only do people having to go to food banks, last year 1.25 million parcels handed out, but in addition to that, people having to borrow. Household debt has risen dramatically because people are having to go to payday lenders and others. We just need to get back to a fair society again.
Now, nobody can dispute the statistics, which shows that the pay of people has been stagnating for years. But at the same time, and I think it's important to make this point, unemployment in this country has been falling sharply. And some people would argue that the reason unemployment actually came down faster than in much of the rest of Europe is actually because the costs of employment in this country are lower. And that is to do with the kind of regulations that don't exist here, but do exist there. So isn't the risk of what you're proposing a rise in unemployment?
Certainly not. What's unfair at the moment is that we've got growth back into our economy, but we're the only major developed country where we've got growth, but wages are stagnating or going backwards. That cannot be right. That means there's unfairness in the distribution of rewards within our society. And all we're asking for is that fairness.
But it is basic economics, John. I mean, you know, if the cost of employment goes up, fewer people will be employed.
Well, if you increase your productivity, that's what we'll do with our investment. It means that you can maintain employment and grow it, but in addition to that, you can maintain the levels of wages. And what we're going for is an economy with high skills and high wages. It's all about having an economic process in which the workers and the businesses are involved in developing the economy in all their interests.
Now, there are some people in Britain who like the flexibility of not being tied to a formal contract. Are you going to say that they simply can't have, let's just say they want 0 hours contracts, you're saying they simply can't have them?
If you look at what all the various pieces of research, most people want to ensure that they have the hours guaranteed, and you can negotiate then with your employer any additional hours, and you can come to a reasonable agreement. There'll always be some who need some special preferences, obviously, but we still want to ensure that people have guaranteed hours and they're negotiated properly and wages match those hours as well. It's not asking for the earth, you know, and the way it's balanced at the moment is that people can't tell what hours they're working, don't know what income's coming in, they're falling back on debt, and as I say, in some instances, this growth in dependence on food banks is unacceptable in, what, the 6th richest country in the world?
Now, the other important element in your plan is the ending of the cap on pay rises for public sector workers. That's a cap of 1% a year at the moment, and in particular, quite a lot more money going to nurses and people working in the health service. That looks like a cost of about £5 billion or so per year. How are you going to pay for that?
No, the government's figures, if you look at it, it said £5 billion over a number of years. 1% increase in pay.
Well, it depends how much you it depends how much you actually you increase.
Okay, if you say 1% increase is about 1.25 billion overall. You grow the economy, you can afford that. But in addition to that, we need to have a fair taxation system. There's no doubt about that. The issue for us is we would not make the same choices of this government. What this government has made the choice is to give away tax giveaways, corporations and the rich. We would not make those choices.
Can I just ask you a question, though, on that? I mean, obviously, you've got the borrowing that you're planning to do for infrastructure
yes,
and your investment bank. But when it comes to issues like funding public sector pay increases or more money for schools and hospitals, are you proposing in your manifesto to show how you will pay for all of those with tax rises?
No, what we'll be doing is we'll have every policy fully costed, and beside that costing will be the funding source. And
some of it will be borrowing, will it?
Well, borrowing for infrastructure, but not day-to-day spending.
That's the question I'm
asking you. Well, that's our fiscal rule. We're not going to be
So there will be tax rises matching every single one of your day-to-day spending commitments?
We'll end the tax giveaways to the corporations and the rich. We'll demonstrate item by item how we will fund those, and that will be about a fair taxation system. But let me give this assurance. Yep. There will be no increases in income tax for middle and low earners. We will not.
But you need to define what middle and low income.
Yes, we will.
What do you mean? So in your manifesto, you will tell us.
We will define that. It'll all be costed.
Can you tell me now what you see as the middle income?
We're looking. The only increases will be on that higher percentages, and that will be in our manifesto.
People on more than 100,000, or
you'll see. We'll define that in our manifesto. You'll see it very, very clearly. In fact, I'll let you know. You'll be the first to know. Okay. But let me just say this. I did ask the government, you remember, because I think I was on the show at the time, I asked the government, could all the opposition parties have access to the Office of Budget Responsibility to cost our programme? They refused. When we go into government, that will be open to all political parties to have access to that information, that assessment, because it will raise the level and standard of our debate about economic policy making overall, and we'll be able to verify the figures of everybody there.
And you're not frightened of what happened to Labour governments in the past, that there will just be a barrage of media attacks on you for allegedly soaking ordinary working people?
There's going to be a barrage of attacks. But the issue around fair taxation is that we will protect middle and low earners. I will say also we will not increase VAT. And I want you to ask Theresa May that question as well, because if you remember last time, the Tories promised no increase in VAT, and then they increased it afterwards. And that falls on, that's a regressive tax, it falls on some of the poorest and middle earners as well. So that's one guarantee we're giving. But
can I just ask you on one question, though? You are also guaranteeing the triple lock.
Yes, we are.
But all the evidence now shows that people over 65 are on higher incomes than working people. In a sense, you are promoting a policy that actually increases inequality.
Let me take you back in history on this one, because I've got a bit of form on this. When Mrs Thatcher broke the link with earnings in the 1980s, I campaigned against it then. I have done for the last 30 years. And
but older people have done very well in the last few years.
There's still 1.7 million older people, pensioners, in poverty at the moment.
So target the resources
and what we want to do is, we believe in universalism. We want to lift everybody out of... And what you saw from the research this morning, that was published this morning, you'll see that if they break the triple lock, it'll be some of the poorest that lose out. And actually also, it'll be young people for the future. And the research that was published by Haymans this morning will tell you pensions will not be protected. I do not want to go backwards. I do not want pensions going back into poverty
now,
again.
Very briefly, because unfortunately we're almost out of time, the polls do not only show that you're behind, but they also show that your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is a big negative for many voters.
Yeah. Don't believe the polls, but let me just the polls are moving in our direction anyway, but who can tell? On the doorstep, that's not the case. I think if you saw Jeremy's speech yesterday, and I think the human side of Jeremy came, he doesn't talk about himself much, but he did yesterday, the human side of him came, you saw a decent, principled, very strong person who stood strong on a number of issues over the years and actually was proved right.
John McDonnell, many thanks for coming in. I hope to see you again in the course of the campaign.